In 2009, Gloria Brown and the late local historian Jim Dills collaborated on the writing of the book Halton's Scotch Block, The People and Their Stories. The following is a presentation developed and presented by Jim on the occasion of the publishing of the book. Inspiration for the Scotch Block settlement came from John and James Stewart. They asked the Upper Canada Land Board for an area where the Scots could settle all together, help each other, and support a minister of their persuasion. That simply meant Presbyterians who spoke Gaelic. And so, a Scottish enclave came about. No major hamlet, town, or city is left to center the Scotch Block. The 16-mile creek still courses through the fields, even as a dam moderates its flow. The CNR still pierces northeast along the route first opened by the Hamilton and Northwest Railway in October 1877. Substantial heritage houses built by the early Scottish settlers in succession to their first cabins remain to mark the progress of the settlement. A coveted deed to the land was the earliest objective of those Scots who arrived from overseas or from the United States. It required that within 3 years, the settler erect and build a good and sufficient dwelling house. One of the early objectives of the block was to establish the church. Outdoor services were held, and in 1825, a building was available for use. Not all was harmony in that early Scotch block. John Stewart Jr. was the local voice of William Lyon Mackenzie, who led a squeezing farmers to take up arms in the Upper Canada Rebellion in 1837. Their participation led to their banishment. Their fortunate escape from the new Fort Henry at Kingston took them to the United States for several years. Schools followed a church in the Scots scale of importance. It was said that Quatre Bras School had a fine library that preceded the Mechanics Institute in Milton, and the Mechanics Institute preceded what is now Milton Public Library. But the clothing of the children and the teachers is often the most interesting part of the school photos. Those early schools continued with building improvements to 1963. Before we leave the log cabin era, note the size of the logs in relation to the lady in the doorway. See how few were required to reach the height of Mrs. Robertson in the door. Building muscle for those tug-of-war teams came from normal farm work. No need to visit the gymnasium or the fitness center. See the size of the arms of these team members in about 1900. Those in the graveyard at Boston Presbyterian Church could tell other stories about life in the Scotch Block. In a booklet by a Milton dentist titled The Female Slave is the story of a young girl who was given liquor at an early age at home. She married and managed to keep her addiction hidden until her husband saw his supply of whiskey disappearing. For a time, he would hide his fresh supply, but she always found it. He eventually decided to pull the 5-gallon keg up the purlin plate of his barn, 35 feet above the barn floor, thinking he could outwit her. When he left for the day, she soon discovered where it was and squeezed through a small opening in the barn door. She put a tub beneath the keg and then shot a hole in the keg with her husband's rifle. After hiding some of the liquor and drinking herself into a drunken state, she was unable to get out of the small barn door opening. Coming home late at night, her husband realized she was missing, but didn't look for her until daylight. It was a cold night, and she was found the next day beyond recovery. Barn raisings were community events. One early writer wrote, "I have seen half-tipsy men swarming all over the skeleton structures. At these raisings, the barns were christened like a ship with a launching, but whiskey instead of wine was used at the ceremony. Once at a raising, a man, bottle in hand, ran up the peak where 2 rafters joined. There, balancing on 1 foot, he sang out, 'It is a good framing, and shall get a good naming. What shall the naming be?' When the prearranged name was shouted back, the man on the rafters so declared it as he cast the bottle to the ground. Was the bottle broken? No. Given that it contained the best liquor supplied at the raising, care was taken to ensure that it fell on soft ground. The farming years packed a lot of hard work into the long days. The first animals used were oxen in preparing the land for cultivation or skidding logs in the bush. Clearing the land was a priority, and equipment was developed to make the task somewhat easier. These photos, probably taken from the late 1800s, show the challenges of those big stumps. The stone lifter also involved clearing the fields. Horses naturally came after the oxen, and as open land was developed, skills in plowing were nurtured. The pioneers built proudly and practically. Their skill is shown in the many examples that remain as an enduring heritage along the roads of the block. We've chosen a few here. The Harrop House of today began as the property of John McNabb, who obtained the crown deed in 1822. In the mid-1850s, the large Georgian-style house was built of local limestone by William Elliott Jr. In 1882, a large end-drive barn was built in the style the Scottish lowlander settlers were familiar with. In 1975, it was donated by the late local lawyer Peter McWilliams, the owner at that time, to Country Heritage Park. Known today as the Elliott House, or the Caniff House, as it was titled in a painting by the artist Tricia Romance, this impressive home was built by Stephen Elliott, the son of William Elliott, in 1880. It is described in the Canadian Champion of that time as being unequaled in size and elegance of finish by any other farm residence in the country. The farm was in the Elliott name until their son John Elliott died in 1959. Working for Mr. Caniff and his architect during its renovation in the winter of 1973, I helped dig out a full-height basement for this building. Sadly, it now stands forlorn in the middle of an industrial park. The fine barn that was on this property was erected in 1884, but has since been demolished. In 2010, the Stewart residence was beautifully restored and designated as a heritage property by Halton Hills. The Jensen family is enjoying the treasure that was once built in the 1830s and has been upgraded since that time without being spoiled. But the Scotch block is about people like James and Margaret Hume, who brought the first oxen to the area from the Genesee Flats in New York State. James died at nearly 85 years of age, and Margaret at 87. Or the pioneer couple, Archibald and Jane Campbell McNabb, who farmed the site that now includes Maplehurst Correctional Center. There were other churches too. The UP Church, established in 1843, built a large brick building in 1866. It was demolished in 1951. Well, people. Here is a random sampling of faces from the past that form the Scotch block. The families, the doctors, and those so proud of their Scottish ancestry that they had their picture taken with all of the symbols of their native land. 25 years later, the book, Halton Scotch Block, speaks for itself. Commissioned for Milton Historical Society, the cost of the book was underwritten by sponsors Andrews Scenic Acres, Chudley's, Given Road West Communications, Home Hardware, and the family of the Honorable Jim Snow. It brought the 50,000 words and 400 pictures to life at that time and continues to do so today. Thank you.